The clock on the mantel read 6:30 p.m., and I had been standing in my living room for nearly an hour, arranging the final touches on the table, my hands trembling slightly as I placed the crystal wine glasses with care. I thought to myself, maybe they're just running late, but deep down I knew something felt off. I picked up my phone, scrolling through messages from Michael and Victoria, smiling at the emojis and casual notes that now felt like distant memories. "Mom, we're on our way," I whispered to myself, only to feel a knot tighten in my stomach. The doorbell rang, and I opened it with hopeful anticipation, but no one was there, just a courier with a small package addressed to me. I sighed and set it down, my eyes drifting to the empty chairs around the meticulously set table. I murmured, "They wouldn't do this, would they?" My thoughts were interrupted by a sudden ping from my phone, a notification lighting up the screen. It was an Instagram post from Michael. "Escaping drama, enjoying family time. #beachvibes, #family fun." I froze, my coffee cup trembling in my hand. Not a single one of them had come to my party. My heart pounded as I muttered, "Not my son, not Victoria, not the kids." The air felt heavier, every tick of the clock echoing in the silence. I sank into the armchair by the window, staring out at the streetlights flickering along Lake Street in Minneapolis, wondering how it could have come to this. "Harold, are you all right?" asked my neighbor from next door, peering through the window. I forced a smile, replying, "I'll be fine, just celebrating quietly tonight." I hung up the phone call and whispered under my breath, "Celebrating?" "Yes, celebrating the betrayal." I set the phone down, letting the reality sink in. The table still perfectly set, the candles burning low, the roast beef growing cold, the decorations immaculate, and yet the house empty of the ones I had hoped would honor me. Only if this story speaks to your heart, please hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment with the city or country you're watching from and the current local time there. My name is Harold Bennett. I'm 75 years old, and tonight, the night of my birthday, changed everything in our family. The night that should have been filled with laughter, hugs, and warmth instead revealed the cracks, the distance, the hidden intentions I had refused to see before. And the real lesson you'll take from this story, stay until the end of the video to understand fully. And now let me take you back to where it all began. As I sank into the armchair, staring at the flickering candlelight, my mind drifted back to the earliest days of my family. The way the sun would spill across the hardwood floors. In our Minneapolis home, lighting up the laughter of children. I remembered Michael as a boy, always eager to help with chores, carrying firewood from the shed with a proud grin, while his sister Emily would sometimes run past, demanding attention and praise for the smallest achievements. I had tried to balance my affection, but somehow the scales always tipped in favor of Emily. I recalled the small birthday celebrations, the carefully wrapped gifts stacked neatly under the Christmas tree, and how Michael's eyes would flicker with disappointment when his present was overlooked or opened last, while Emily's were always first and lauded loudly by everyone, including my late wife Margaret. "Harold, why does she get the biggest slice of pie every time?" Michael had asked once, voice quiet, almost hesitant. I remember kneeling down to his level, smoothing back his hair, and saying, "Because we love her too, son, but your turn will come." Yet as the years rolled by, the same pattern repeated itself. I could see now how Victoria had learned the art of subtle manipulation from Emily, the way small preferences and slight indulgences can shape expectations. The memories were punctuated by the scent of our old oak kitchen table, the scratches from the kids' toys that Michael and Emily had dragged across it, and the faded watercolor paintings the children had made for me, taped to the refrigerator. Michael had always been a sensitive child, hesitant to assert himself, and I had encouraged him quietly, whispering, "One day, son, you will understand how to stand your ground." I could see the reflection of that young boy now, sitting quietly at the dinner table, eyes downcast while the rest of the family bantered and laughed, and I felt the seed of resilience that had been growing, unnoticed, inside him. Even in those small injustices, the tiny favoritism, the overlooked achievements, I had nurtured patience, discretion, and thoughtfulness. I remembered a specific summer evening, Emily storming off to the porch with a tantrum over an ice cream cone, while Michael quietly polished the porch railings, earning no praise but gaining my silent admiration. "You always do the right thing, Michael," I whispered, though only he could hear. Those moments, small and almost invisible, had formed a foundation, a quiet strength that I would need tonight. The realization came to me slowly that the patterns of childhood, ignored efforts, unseen sacrifices, subtle slights, had repeated themselves in the present with Victoria and even Sophie and Ethan, echoing the same preferential treatment and disregard. It was as if history had cast its shadow across the years, teaching me the importance of vigilance and strategy. A soft chime from the doorbell pulled me back to the present, the night air heavy with anticipation, and I knew that the seemingly small inequities of the past had sown the groundwork for understanding the true dynamics at play tonight. Somewhere in that tension, I felt the stirrings of resolve, the quiet determination that would guide my next moves and ensure that the history of being overlooked and underestimated would not repeat itself. Even in the muted grief of these reflections, there was a spark of foresight, a hint that the night ahead would reveal truths that had been long hidden, and perhaps, finally, set the stage for justice and recognition that had been denied for decades. The sun had barely begun to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors of my Minneapolis home, when I noticed the first sign that the evening might take an unexpected turn. Michael had called earlier, his voice unusually cautious. "Dad, could we talk for a minute about the house?" I paused, my hand lingering on the teapot as a chill ran down my spine. I nodded, not answering aloud, and waited for him to continue. Victoria, in the background, leaned against the doorway, folding her arms, a practiced smile barely hiding impatience. "We think it might be time to consider some changes," Michael said carefully, shifting his weight. I studied him, recognizing the careful phrasing he had learned over the years, the way words could be used to soften what was really coming. I did not react immediately, breaking my old habit of defensiveness. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee, my fingers steady despite the rapid beating of my heart, and said softly, "Go on." His brows furrowed for a moment, surprised at my calm, and Victoria's eyes darted between us. "Well, we thought perhaps it would be good if you let us handle the property for a while," Michael said, his tone almost apologetic, but the words felt like a trap, a challenge disguised as concern. I nodded slowly, taking a sip, letting the tension stretch. "I see," I murmured. That simple acknowledgement, calm and measured, shifted the dynamic instantly. Suddenly, it was no longer about them controlling me, but about observing their intentions and measuring my response. In that moment, a door opened at the side of the kitchen, and Emily, my sister, stepped in quietly. Her presence brought with it an energy I had not felt in years, a mix of curiosity and subtle judgment. "Harold," she said, her tone carefully neutral, "I thought you might want to know what has been happening behind the scenes. It is more complicated than it seems." I raised an eyebrow, inviting her to continue. She handed me a small envelope, the paper slightly crumpled, and I felt the weight of history in her careful hands. "You might want to see this before making any decisions," she whispered. My eyes scanned the contents quickly, a series of documents and notes that illuminated patterns I had only sensed before, small manipulations, overlooked preferences, and strategic omissions that had subtly guided the household's behavior for years. Michael shifted, sensing the subtle power change, and Victoria's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. I leaned back, letting the realization settle, feeling a spark of opportunity ignite in the quiet room. "This changes things," I said, my voice calm but carrying a quiet authority that had been missing for too long. Their reactions were immediate, though measured, and I saw the first tremors of uncertainty pass through their eyes. Emily lingered, offering a slight nod, her expression unreadable but supportive, and I knew the next steps would be decisive. The tension hung in the air like a taut wire, every unspoken word heavy with expectation, and in that silence, I felt the subtle promise that tonight would mark the beginning of a profound shift. Something had been set in motion, something they did not yet fully understand, and I could sense that by the time the evening ended, the balance in the room would have changed forever, revealing truths long concealed under layers of pretense. I sat alone long after Emily left, the envelope still resting on the kitchen table beside my untouched coffee. Outside, a cold Minnesota wind rattled the maple branches against the window, but the real storm was unfolding inside my own family. The papers she had handed me were not dramatic on their own. That was what made them so disturbing. A copied email, a printed text message, notes from conversations that had happened without me. Small things, ordinary things, yet when placed together, they formed a picture I could no longer ignore. I picked up one page and read a message from Victoria to Emily dated 6 months earlier. Harold is getting older. Somebody needs to start making decisions before he makes a mess of things. My chest tightened. Another message followed. Michael agrees. We should slowly take over the financial stuff before it becomes a problem. I stared at the words for several seconds. Nobody had ever spoken to me about concerns. Nobody had asked for help. Instead, they had built an entire story around me while smiling to my face. The next morning, I called Michael. Son, can I ask you something? There was a pause. Sure, Dad. Have you been telling people I cannot manage my affairs anymore? Silence. Not confusion. Not surprise. Silence. Dad, people worry about you. That was not my question. Another pause. Then he sighed. We were only trying to help. I looked around the kitchen. Margaret and I had spent decades building together. By discussing my life without me. I asked quietly. It was not like that, he replied. Then explain it to me. But he could not. His answers were vague. His words sounded rehearsed, as though he had repeated the same explanation so many times that he had started believing it himself. Over the following days, more pieces appeared. Friends from church began speaking to me differently. One neighbor asked if I was considering assisted living. Another asked whether I had already transferred control of my finances to Michael. Where are people hearing this? I asked. The answers were always similar. I heard it from someone who heard it from Victoria. The story had spread quietly, efficiently, like a stain moving through fabric. People believed I was confused. People believed I needed supervision. People believed decisions were already being made for me. The most painful part was not the lie itself. It was how easily everyone accepted it. Years of responsibility, years of hard work, years of sacrifice, all erased by a narrative repeated often enough. A week later, I attended Ethan's school concert. When I arrived, I noticed an empty seat beside my grandson. I smiled and walked toward it. Before I could sit down, Victoria stepped in front of me. Actually, we saved that seat for someone else. Her voice was pleasant enough for outsiders not to notice. I looked around. Half the row was empty. I see, I said. She offered a tight smile. We just wanted things organized. For the first time in my life, I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I simply turned and sat 3 rows back. From there, I watched my family laughing together while acting as though everything was perfectly normal. That was when the final illusion broke. They no longer saw me as part of the family circle. They saw me as an obstacle to be managed. And as the concert ended, my phone vibrated with a new message from an unfamiliar number. I opened it expecting spam. Instead, I found a single sentence attached to a photograph that made my blood run cold. Mr. Bennett, I think you should know what your family has been planning behind your back. For several minutes, I sat frozen in my car outside the school auditorium, staring at the photograph attached to the message. It showed a conference room I recognized immediately. It was inside the offices of a local estate planning firm downtown. Around the table sat Michael, Victoria, and 2 people I had never met. In front of them was a file folder with my name printed across the tab. Harold Bennett. I read the message again. Mr. Bennett, I think you should know what your family has been planning behind your back. My hands tightened around the phone. I replied immediately. Who is this? No answer came. That night, I barely slept. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by old family photographs, trying to understand how things had reached this point. By sunrise, I decided there had to be some misunderstanding. Families made mistakes. Conversations got distorted. Maybe I was seeing the worst because I was hurt. So I tried to fix it. I called Michael first. The call went straight to voicemail. Son, it is Dad. I think we need to sit down and talk. Just you and me. Call me back. Hours passed. Nothing. The next day, I sent an email. I kept it simple. Michael, I love you. If there is a problem, let us discuss it honestly. No response. 2 days later, I mailed a handwritten letter. I spent nearly an hour choosing every word carefully. I told him about memories from when he was young. I reminded him how proud I was of the man he had become. I asked for one conversation. Just one. A week later, the letter was returned unopened. The envelope carried a small sticker from the postal service. Refused by recipient. I stared at it for a long time. Somehow that tiny label hurt more than an argument ever could. I tried reaching Sophie and Ethan. Their birthdays were coming up, so I mailed cards with gift certificates tucked inside. 3 weeks later, the cards arrived back in my mailbox, unclaimed. One evening, I finally received a text from Victoria. My heart jumped when I saw her name appear on the screen. Then I opened it. "Please stop creating tension. Everyone needs space right now." I read those words 3 times. Creating tension. As though asking to speak with my own family had become an unreasonable request. I typed a response. What exactly have I done? The message showed delivered. It was never answered. Meanwhile, the strange narrative about me continued spreading. A neighbor mentioned hearing that I planned to sell the house because I could no longer manage it. A former church friend asked whether Michael had already taken over my finances. Someone else casually suggested retirement, housing options. Every rumor sounded similar. Every story painted me as a man fading away while responsible relatives stepped in to help. The worst part was how organized it all felt. Not one dramatic attack. Not one explosive confrontation. Just hundreds of tiny cuts. Assumptions. Exclusions. Decisions made without me. Conversations held behind closed doors. One rainy afternoon, I opened social media and found another photograph. Michael stood smiling beside Victoria and the children at a lakeside resort. Hundreds of comments filled the post. One comment caught my attention. "Glad Harold finally agreed to let you take control of everything." Michael had clicked the heart icon beneath it. He had not corrected it. He had not denied it. He had simply allowed the lie to stand. I closed the application and sat alone in the silence of my house. The grandfather clock ticked steadily across the room. The rain tapped softly against the windows. For the first time in my life, I felt completely removed from the people I had spent decades loving. Not angry, not even surprised anymore, just alone. And as darkness settled outside, my phone remained silent, my mailbox remained empty, and the realization settled over me like a winter fog. Whatever battle was unfolding, I was facing it entirely by myself. The weeks that followed moved with a strange kind of silence. Not the peaceful silence Margaret and I used to enjoy on Sunday mornings with coffee and newspapers spread across the kitchen table, but a heavier silence, one that seemed to settle into the walls of the house itself. Every room carried an absence. Her favorite chair remained beside the fireplace. Her gardening gloves still hung in the garage. Some mornings I would catch myself reaching for a second coffee mug before remembering there was no one there to drink it. One afternoon, I found an old voicemail she had left years ago. "Harold, do not forget the groceries. And drive safely. I love you." I listened to it 3 times, then 5, then 10. The sound of her voice filled the empty kitchen and somehow made the loneliness feel even larger. I realized that I had spent years convincing myself that family would eventually fill the space Margaret left behind. I had believed birthdays, holidays, and Sunday dinners would keep the loneliness away. But sitting there alone, I finally understood something painful. I had not been grieving only Margaret. I had been grieving the family I thought we had built together. A few days later, I drove to the cemetery. The Minnesota sky was gray and low, threatening rain. I sat beside Margaret's headstone for nearly an hour. "I think I got it wrong," I said quietly. I kept trying to hold everyone together. The wind stirred through the trees. Maybe I should have spent less time protecting everyone and more time paying attention. For the first time in months, I did not feel anger. I felt clarity. On the drive home, my phone rang. It was Emily. "How are you doing?" she asked. I almost gave my usual answer. "Fine. Everything is fine." Instead, I told the truth. "I am tired, Emily." There was a long pause. "I know," she said softly, "but you are stronger than you think." That evening, I walked through every room of the house. The family photos lining the hallway seemed different now. I noticed something I had never fully acknowledged before. In almost every picture, I was standing slightly behind everyone else. Holding the camera, paying for the trip, organizing the gathering, supporting the moment. Rarely part of it. The realization stung, but it also freed me. The next morning, another letter arrived from the estate planning office. Not a threat, not a warning. Simply a routine notice connected to documents carrying my name. Months earlier, I would have tossed it aside without a second thought. This time I sat down and read every page carefully. Every word, every detail. For the first time, I stopped waiting for someone else to explain my own life to me. Later that afternoon, I opened a notebook and began making a list. Financial accounts, property records, legal documents, contacts, questions. It was a simple act, but it felt important. The loneliness had not disappeared. Margaret was still gone. My family was still distant. The house was still quiet. Yet something inside me had shifted. I was no longer standing still inside the pain. I was beginning to move through it. And as the evening sun spilled across the dining room table, illuminating the notebook in front of me, my phone suddenly lit up with a new message from the same unknown number. This time there was no photograph attached. Only 6 words. You are finally asking the right questions. The morning light spilled through the blinds, casting stripes across the polished hardwood floors, and I stood in the study, a fresh cup of coffee in hand, reviewing the list I had made the night before. Each item represented a step toward reclaiming control over my life, my finances, and my sense of self. I called the bank, not to ask permission, but to confirm my access to accounts that I had legally maintained all along. Mr. Bennett, are you certain you want to proceed? The advisor asked cautiously. I smiled faintly. Absolutely. It is time I do what I should have done years ago. After the call, I printed detailed summaries of my investments, reorganized my retirement accounts, and started reaching out to old clients and colleagues in Minneapolis. Harold, I thought you were retired. A familiar voice said over the line. I replied evenly. But I realized retirement is what you make of it. Each conversation reminded me of connections I had nurtured long before the family drama had consumed my attention. That afternoon, I took a walk along the Mississippi River, my steps slow but deliberate, and made notes in a leather-bound journal about a consulting project I had wanted to start for over a decade. I sent emails proposing my ideas, carefully tailored, and received responses within hours. Harold, we would love to meet next week, one replied. I felt a surge of momentum, a rare excitement I had not allowed myself to experience for years. Back at home, I set up my office space, organizing books, financial papers, and personal notes into a functional, efficient system. The walls, once bare, now bore framed achievements, certificates, and photographs of moments I had overlooked in the rush of family obligations. Michael called again that evening. Dad, are you sure you do not want to discuss this with us? He asked. I leaned back in my chair, observing the fading light through the window. I am discussing it with myself, and that is enough, I replied calmly. Victoria's voice came through faintly in the background, sounding slightly uneasy. I did not need to explain further. That night, I drafted a plan to host a small workshop on financial literacy for local seniors, combining my experience and resources to create something meaningful beyond my household. I realized that rebuilding myself was no longer about proving a point to my family, but about establishing my own path. As I typed the final lines of an email to a potential collaborator, I paused and looked out the window. The street was quiet, the city lights reflecting on the pavement, but inside me, a sense of purpose was growing, steady and undeniable. I knew that the work I was beginning now would ripple outward, bringing recognition, engagement, and a new chapter of independence. Something about the way the evenings settled over Minneapolis made me certain that the coming weeks would mark the start of tangible success. I could feel it in my bones, the subtle but persistent momentum, as though the world itself had shifted just enough to allow me to take the first real step forward into the life I deserved. By the following morning, the transformation was already visible in the way I moved through my home and prepared for the day. I adjusted the crisp navy blazer over my shoulders, straightened the silver nameplate on my desk reading Harold Bennett, Senior Consultant, and took a deep breath as sunlight streamed through the large bay windows of my newly organized office. The desk was no longer cluttered with neglected paperwork, but lined with carefully labeled files and a digital planner displaying appointments with clients from across Minneapolis. My phone buzzed, and I answered without hesitation. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett," said a young entrepreneur I had met at a networking event. "Your proposal for the financial planning seminar is exactly what we need. Can we meet to finalize details?" I smiled, feeling the steady pulse of competence and purpose. "Absolutely. Let us set a time this afternoon. I look forward to it." Later, Emily stopped by unexpectedly, her expression a mixture of curiosity and restrained admiration. "I see you have really taken control, Harold," she said. I poured her a cup of tea, placing it carefully on the side table. "Yes," I replied calmly. "It is not about control over others, but mastery of one's own life." The corner of her mouth twitched into a faint, knowing smile, acknowledging the change without a word of judgment. As the day unfolded, I conducted video calls from my home office, wearing the new headset I had invested in, speaking with clarity and authority, each client impressed by the precise data and the confidence I projected. "Your approach is refreshing," said a client from St. Paul, leaning forward in his chair. "We have never seen such thorough analysis delivered so clearly." I nodded, making notes and demonstrating strategies I had developed over decades, finally allowing myself to enjoy the recognition for the knowledge and effort I had accumulated. Later, Michael called again, a note of hesitation in his voice. "Dad, I heard about your new project. It sounds impressive." I leaned back, adjusting my blazer, and replied, "It is only the beginning. We will see where it leads." The words felt balanced, firm, and entirely mine. That evening, I hung a new plaque above the mantel, engraved with Harold Bennett, financial consultant and advisor, a symbol of regained stature and the independence I had claimed through quiet determination. I glanced around the living room, the family photographs still lining the walls, but now I observed them differently. They no longer held the weight of exclusion or betrayal. Instead, they marked history, evidence of a journey that had brought me to this point. The desk, the plaque, the neatly stacked client files, and even the calm efficiency in answering each call were all signs of strength reclaimed. As the sun dipped low over the Minneapolis skyline, casting long shadows across the quiet streets, I felt a sense of completeness and readiness. The skills, knowledge, and authority I had nurtured for decades were finally recognized, and I knew that the next steps in my work and in my life would carry both purpose and satisfaction. The evening settled in, and my gaze drifted back toward the street where the city lights flickered, a subtle reminder that the world continued outside these walls, yet inside, a new chapter had already begun. 3 weeks later, the present finally caught up with the past. I stood outside a conference room on the 22nd floor of a glass office building overlooking downtown Minneapolis, the same building that had appeared in the photograph sent by the anonymous number months earlier. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city stretched beneath a gray autumn sky, calm and distant, while inside me every instinct was alert. The receptionist offered a polite smile. "Mr. Bennett, everyone is already here." I nodded. "Thank you." As I walked down the hallway, I noticed something that would have terrified the old version of me. I was no longer wondering what they thought of me. I was wondering whether they were prepared for what was about to happen. The conference room door stood slightly open. Voices drifted through the gap. Michael was speaking first. "I still think we should approach this carefully." Victoria responded immediately. "We have been careful for over a year." A third voice joined them. An attorney. Calm. Professional. "The final decision belongs to Mr. Bennett." A long silence followed. I stepped inside. Every conversation stopped. Michael looked older than I remembered. Victoria's confident posture stiffened for half a second. The attorney stood and extended his hand. "Mr. Bennett, thank you for coming." I shook it. "Good morning." No one knew quite what to say next. For months, people had been discussing my future without me. Now I was sitting at the head of the table. The shift was impossible to ignore. The attorney opened a folder. "Before we begin, there are several matters requiring clarification." I sat quietly and folded my hands together. Across from me, Michael cleared his throat. "Dad, maybe we should talk privately afterward." I met his eyes. "We have had plenty of time for private conversations." Victoria looked down at the polished table surface. For the first time, neither of them seemed entirely certain of the outcome. The attorney continued reviewing documents one by one. Property records, trust agreements, financial summaries. Each page represented a decision that belonged solely to me. The room remained tense but controlled. No raised voices, no accusations, just facts slowly moving across the table like pieces on a chessboard. Halfway through the meeting, another person entered quietly. My stomach tightened immediately. It was the source of the anonymous messages. A woman in her early 60s carrying a leather portfolio. The attorney stood. "Thank you for joining us, Ms. Reynolds." She nodded politely before taking a seat near the end of the table. Michael frowned. "Who is she?" Victoria looked equally confused. The attorney glanced toward me. "Mr. Bennett requested her presence." I said nothing. Ms. Reynolds opened her portfolio and carefully removed several documents. I recognized them instantly. Some had been sent anonymously months ago. Others I had never seen before. The atmosphere in the room changed immediately. Even the attorney seemed more serious now. Michael shifted uneasily. "Dad, what is all this?" I looked at him for a long moment. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, simply with clarity. Something I should have learned a long time ago. Ms. Reynolds slid the first document across the table. Victoria's face lost color as soon as she recognized it. Michael leaned forward, confused. The attorney adjusted his glasses and slowly turned the page toward himself. The room fell completely silent. Then Ms. Reynolds took a breath and said, "Before any decisions are made today, everyone here deserves to understand exactly what has been happening for the last 18 months. Ms. Reynolds opened the portfolio and placed 3 documents in the center of the table with deliberate care. Nobody spoke. The attorney studied the first page, then the second. His expression changed almost immediately. Not dramatically, just enough. Michael noticed it first. "What is it?" he asked. The attorney looked up. "These are records of consultations regarding Mr. Bennett's estate that occurred without his knowledge or authorization." Victoria shifted in her chair. "There must be some misunderstanding." Ms. Reynolds calmly slid another page forward. "There is no misunderstanding. Dates, attendees, and correspondence are all documented." The room grew still. I remained silent. For months I had imagined this moment differently. I thought I might feel vindicated, angry, triumphant. Instead I felt surprisingly calm. The attorney continued reading. Several recommendations were presented as if they reflected Mr. Bennett's wishes. He paused. However, there is no evidence he was informed. Michael turned toward Victoria. "What is he talking about?" She opened her mouth, but no answer came. Ms. Reynolds spoke gently. "Mr. Bennett was never supposed to see these documents. That was the assumption." Michael stared at the papers. "Victoria?" Her voice was quieter now. "I was trying to protect the family." The attorney folded his hands. Protecting a family and making assumptions on behalf of a competent individual are not the same thing. No one argued. The facts were doing all the work. Then Ms. Reynolds revealed the final document. Unlike the others, it had my signature on it. Recent, official, fully executed. The attorney reviewed it carefully before looking directly at me. "Mr. Bennett, would you like to explain?" I nodded. "Several months ago, I reviewed every asset, every account, every property record, and every estate document connected to my name." Michael looked confused. "What does that mean?" I met his eyes. "It means I stopped letting other people define my future." The attorney placed the document flat on the table. "As of last month, Mr. Bennett established a new charitable foundation and transferred a substantial portion of his estate into it." Silence. Complete silence. Even the air in the room seemed to stop moving. Michael blinked. "A foundation? For financial education programs, senior support services, and community development initiatives," I replied. "Projects that are already operating," Ms. Reynolds added. "The first seminars are fully funded." Victoria stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Not because of the money, because of the certainty, because the man sitting across from her was no longer waiting for approval. Michael slowly leaned back in his chair. "You already did all this?" "Yes." "Without telling anyone?" I offered a small, tired smile. "For the first time in a very long time, I made decisions for myself." The attorney closed the folder. "Everything has been reviewed and legally finalized." The words landed heavily. Finalized. Not proposed. Not pending. Finalized. Michael lowered his gaze to the table. Victoria remained motionless. The future they had imagined was no longer sitting somewhere ahead waiting to happen. It had already changed. Months ago. Quietly. Completely. Then the attorney reached into the folder one final time and removed a sealed envelope. "There is one more matter," he said. "A matter that Mr. Bennett specifically instructed us to disclose today." As he placed the envelope on the table, every eye in the room fixed on it, and for the first time all afternoon, even I felt my pulse quicken. The attorney broke the seal on the envelope and carefully removed a single document. Unlike the other papers, this one had been prepared months earlier and witnessed by both Ms. Reynolds and the firm's senior partner. This statement was drafted at Mr. Bennett's request after concerns were raised regarding communication and representation, the attorney explained. Michael looked exhausted now. "What is it?" The attorney placed the document in front of him. It establishes future conditions for any family involvement with Mr. Bennett's personal affairs, properties, charitable foundation, and estate planning decisions. Michael scanned the first page. Victoria leaned closer. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Finally, Michael looked up. "You created boundaries." I nodded. "Yes." "You put it in writing." "Yes." Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. "You did not trust us." I met her gaze calmly. Trust is not something that survives on assumptions. It survives on actions. Nobody argued with that. The attorney continued. The document specifies that all future discussions involving Mr. Bennett's assets, legal affairs, healthcare decisions, or foundation activities require his direct participation and written approval. Ms. Reynolds folded her hands. "No exceptions." Michael slowly lowered the pages. "You thought we would keep going." I considered the question carefully. I thought the situation would continue unless I changed it. For the first time all afternoon, he seemed unable to find a response. The realization settling over him was not about money or documents. It was the realization that I had stopped waiting for permission to protect my own life. Victoria stared out the window overlooking downtown Minneapolis. "We never expected this." "That was the problem," I replied quietly. "Nobody expected me to make my own decisions." The words were not cruel. They were simply true. The attorney closed the file. "Everything moving forward will be handled according to these instructions." Michael rubbed his forehead. "Dad, what happens now?" It was a simple question, but beneath it lived 100 others. What happens to the family? What happens to the future they imagined? What happens to us? I took a slow breath before answering. Now everyone has a choice. They waited. You can build a relationship with me because you want one, or you can walk away. But from this day forward, there will be no confusion about where I stand. The room remained still. Nobody interrupted. Nobody protested. The conversation had finally moved beyond arguments and explanations. It had arrived at accountability. A few minutes later, the meeting ended. Chairs moved. Folders closed. People gathered their belongings. Yet no one seemed eager to leave. Michael approached me near the door. "Dad," his voice cracked slightly. "I do not know how we got here." I studied his face. For the first time in a long while, he looked less like a man defending a position and more like a son searching for answers. "Neither do I said honestly. "But pretending nothing happened will not fix it." He nodded slowly. Victoria stood several feet away, silent, thoughtful, no longer projecting certainty. Outside the conference room, life continued as normal. Elevators opened and closed. Employees hurried through hallways. The city moved forward. Yet for us, something fundamental had changed. The boundaries were clear now. The truth was visible. The decisions had been made. But as I walked toward the elevator and glanced back one final time, I could see it in Michael's eyes. The documents had settled the legal questions. The emotional ones were only beginning. The city streets outside my Minneapolis apartment glowed softly under the evening lights, and inside, I finally felt a sense of calm that had been absent for years. My office was tidy, the papers organized, and the soft hum of my computer accompanied the quiet rhythm of my thoughts. The weight of betrayal, exclusion, and neglect had not vanished entirely, but it had been transformed into clarity, focus, and a renewed sense of purpose. I realized that the most profound lessons in life often arrive disguised as hardship. Trust must be earned and boundaries respected. Yet even when others fail to honor these principles, it is never too late to reclaim your own life. To anyone listening who feels overlooked, dismissed, or undervalued, know that your worth is not determined by the actions or recognition of others. Take control of your own story, honor your instincts, and protect your peace. Look after your finances, your decisions, and your emotions with the same care you would a treasured heirloom. Each morning presents a new opportunity to align your choices with your values and to define yourself on your own terms. I glanced at the small brass compass sitting on my desk, a gift from Margaret years ago, and smiled. Its needle pointed steadily north, unwavering, a reminder that clarity and direction come from within. I also know that the universe has a way of guiding those who listen carefully and act with integrity. My name is Harold Bennett. I am 75 years old, and the core lesson I want to share is this. Your self-worth is yours to safeguard and define. Life will always present challenges, and people may disappoint, but your response defines your future. As the city lights shimmered through the window, I felt a quiet confidence and resilience settle into my chest. The work I have begun, the foundation I have established, and the life I have claimed for myself are only the beginning. In the coming weeks, I will share new stories of growth, insight, and the subtle triumphs that arise from patience, observation, and quiet determination. Stay with me as we explore these moments together, and may the lessons learned here help you recognize your own strength, protect your heart, and continue to move forward with hope and clarity.